Well, today, Ukraine is marking 1,000 days of war with Russia. And its president has this warning to Europe.
Putin is focused on winning this war. He will not stop on his own.
Well, Volodymyr Zelensky urging his European allies to push harder towards what he called a just peace, even as they grapple with the US taking a step deeper into the fray by allowing the use of longer-range weapons on Russia. Well, my next guest writes, and I quote, "It was 1,000 days ago that President Putin launched his invasion of Ukraine, expecting to capture Kyiv and install a puppet regime within a week. Well, 1,000 days later, his army controls 17% of the country and has lost thousands of soldiers. That was a massive miscalculation that will haunt Russia for generations." The words of Carl Bildt, who is the co-chair of the European Council on Foreign Relations, also former Prime Minister of Sweden. He joins me now live. It's good to have you, Carl. Thank you very much indeed for your time on what is a real grim milestone as far as this war on Ukraine is concerned. And at a time where in the last 24 hours we have seen the permission given by the United States for Ukraine to use these longer range missiles on Russia. What do you make of that decision by the US president? Russia certainly sees it as more than provocative. Your sense?
I think the escalation that we've seen lately is the escalation done by the Russians for reasons I can understand because of the difficult situation that they have. I mean, they brought in 10,000 North Korean troops. They had a massive missile barrage against the energy and infrastructure of Kyiv the other day, of all of Ukraine the other day. So this particular move, I think, is a fairly natural one, that it will be possible for the Ukrainians to use also these weapons to strike Russian military targets more or less in the vicinity of the border. One should note that Ukraine have other even more long-range weapons that they make themselves that strikes far longer.
The Ukrainian president addressing the European Parliament today, and you'll have heard his words, saying in part that Ukraine deserves to make 2025 the year of peace. What can Europe do to help that or effect that? Certainly the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz making a call to President Putin over the weekend, the Ukrainian leader calling that opening a Pandora's box, accusing effectively, without saying it, accusing Olaf Scholz of appeasement at what is a very, very important time. So what's Europe's next move here, and how can they help push this, the prospects of peace harder?
I think the by far most important thing that we Europeans and Americans hopefully can do is to send a message to Mr. Putin that he will not succeed. That we will continue to support Ukraine, that is financially, that is militarily, that is diplomatically, as long as it's necessary, so that Mr. Putin will have to give up his intention to make further military advances and have to sit down on the negotiating table and do a decent deal with President Zelensky. That's not going to be easy, but we have to send a message to him. There is no military solution, and we need to block his attempt at imposing a military solution on Ukraine. That is absolutely critical.
Were you disappointed to see reports of that call between the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and President Putin, the first call that the German Chancellor has made since the beginning of this war?
Not necessarily. Talking doesn't change very much, and it doesn't necessarily hurt. I think that's my guess. It was a reflection of two things. First, we have an election campaign coming up in Germany. Second, we have a new president coming into the United States who is evidently very keen to talk to President Putin. And then I think the feeling was probably in Berlin, why leave all of the talking to the Americans? But I don't think it changed very much.
The same day that the US gave Ukraine the green light to use these longer-term weapons, the longer-range weapons, the Kremlin updated its nuclear policy. Now, Moscow now says it reserves the right to use its nuclear deterrent to respond to aggression from any non-nuclear state if it's supported by a nuclear state. I mean, this is ratcheting up the rhetoric. Whether or not this is just propaganda remains to be seen. This certainly suggests that the situation has become more dangerous, not less, in the past 24 hours. How concerned are you at this point of the prospect of a wider conflict here impacting Europe very directly?
I mean, that particular change of nuclear doctrine was decided, I think, a couple of months ago by now, but it's now been formally ratified the other day. But I saw it at the time and see it today more as a sign of weakness, that Mr. Putin is not convinced that his armies can deliver the result on the battlefield that he wants, and then he needs to rattle the threatened nuclear use in order to scare the West and scare the Ukrainians into some sort of agreement, whatever that should be, or surrender to the Russian terms. I do think, to add to that we are in a dangerous situation. But I think that particular nuclear saber-rattling should be seen more as a sign of Russian weakness than a sign of Russian strength.
That's an interesting perspective. 2 undersea cables have been cut or broken in the Baltic Sea in as many days, Carl. One between Finland and Germany, and the other between Lithuania and Sweden. Can you tell us what kind of communications this would disrupt and what the real world, as it were, impact might be?
Well, I think details are somewhat scarce at the moment, but I mean, some communications are disrupted. There are alternative ways of doing it, and there are ways of repairing it. But we have to see. We have to look very carefully. Be open to what it could be. I see the Germans are talking in terms of a sabotage. Could be other causes. It does happen now and then, but it could also be a malevolent actor, whoever that could be, that has done it.
While we're talking about Sweden here, and as former Prime Minister, it's worth getting your sort of insight into the fact that Sweden is now sending out instructions, as I understand it, to citizens on how to cope with an outbreak of war. That suggests a real sense of concern at this point. How should we consider, or certainly how should Swedish citizens consider those instructions, and how might we, who are further afield, sort of look at those instructions, and why now, very specifically, do you think?
Well, we had those instructions, a leaflet going out to all of the families of Sweden during the entire Cold War period, and we updated it now there. It was called If War Comes, and what you're supposed to do. Then it disappeared for a couple of decades, and then it was resurrected whenever that could be, 10 years ago, and dealing with emergencies, could be natural disasters, could be other disasters of different sorts, but also with the possibility of what could happen if war strikes Sweden. So it's a new version of that particular leaflet that is now being distributed, and in the expression of the fact that we need to be more prepared for a security and otherwise environment that is far more challenging and even dangerous than used to be the case before. So that's the background to that sort of new version of that particular leaflet that is now coming out.
Very briefly then, and finally, you wrote a piece in Foreign Policy where you sort of argued about, the veracity of or the strength of Donald Trump's deal making, as it were. Of course, he has said that he will make good on his promise to end the war in a day when he becomes president. And what would that look like, do you think, given, and this piece that you have argued in talks about the sort of, the robustness or not of the deals made in the past?
Well, he said he's going to make peace in 24 hours. That's not going to happen. I mean, clearly. Do I know what he intends to do? No, I don't. Do I think that he knows what he's going to do? I doubt. But I was looking at the record of his peacemaking during his first term in office. I mean, North Korea, didn't really work out that particular well. They have more nuclear weapons now than then. Iran didn't really work out very well with sort of skipping the JCPOA and maximum pressure. They are closer to nuclear weapon now than they were then. And then, of course, Afghanistan, where he really threw the Afghan government under the bus and just decided to turn to the Taliban. So that particular record of Donald Trump is not entirely encouraging. I sincerely hope that he and the people around him have learned from those failures.